Hello everyone, here follows the further correspondence with our government here in Belgium concerning the coronavirus. What I've been sending yesterday, February 28th. Here the letter as follows. Further explanation. Regulations Coronavirus. Dear Merces de Blok's assistants, Minister of Public Health in Belgium, your reaction was well received and fully appreciated. However, it leaves no choice but to be a bit more specific here via email, where it is the wish, but also a duty to communicate the following to the Minister in persona. Good, I'll try to be brief. Yesterday we received an extremely important message from our news redaction, stemming from a for us year-long trustworthy source. Namely, we obtained this through the Border Scientific and Free Community of Interest in Switzerland, called FIGU. On the basis of these weighty and moreover accurately correct analyzed specifications of the coronavirus pathogen, we, as an alternative editorial staff and representatives of the people, are to provide the following regulations to you, Merces de Blok, and your assistants, and bring a light shine on the following submitted regulations. Would well appreciating thanks for this, Merces Dr. Maggie de Blok, Minister of Public Health, and your assistants for your attention here. Considering the strength properties of the coronavirus pathogen, it turns out to be extremely important and a priority having set in front the following precautions. Namely, that an accentuation should be placed on isolation. Now, what does this mean? Because this does not only mean the required behavior of each and every one, but especially everything concerning transport, traveling, new guidelines concerning food import, etc., etc. All that is underlined here in the text, we would like to see made clear to the Belgian people, so it is our wish that we, being public scientists, etc., see the people informed about all the points and specifications as soon as possible. Here the regulations and guidelines as follows. The quarantine measures have turned out to be completely inadequate, in which the virus does not only infect the individual, but also does so through the clothes, the air, and by touching the body, as well as possibly, what is also to be mentioned here, through the food in some cases. 1. It is important that all stay in the house for as long as possible, which also means that travel to faraway countries today may no longer happen without certain dangers. 2. Public transport, trains, aircrafts, ships, mass transport, stations and other public spaces should be avoided as much as possible. 3. Normally, the whole country in China should have been isolated and closed down immediately, for which unfortunately it is now too late, whereby the disease has spread to such an extent that it is already belonging to a national problem, and this with a high probability worldwide. And so it would be necessary to consider the solution that will be mentioned in our next letter, and in so doing, hopefully medical science will take up on this, and through this create effective medicines that really help. But when I say our letter, then I mean my letter, because it is my responsibility I take to provide or offer the solution to our government to make it available to the public. For this, in view of our higher scientifically obtained data and specifications, where it turns out to be impossible to still contain the virus, and most probably also worldwide, which we also want to see communicated to the public, and also for this reason the solution in our next letter should be considered and please as soon as possible. 5. Because of the specifications, we were also informed that the number declared in the mainstream media definitely and absolutely should be much higher, partly due to the fact that the disease has a much longer incubation period in store than what has been generally stated, and which moreover is usually asymptomatic and at the same time already contagious or highly contagious. Now, in relation to the increasing figures that will inevitably influence our economy, each and everyone understands, of course, that it would be very drastic politically and economically if everything were to be stopped immediately, and that this for some profitable activities would not be desirable and rather to be avoided, which was to be expected despite all dangers involved. But which makes it also clear that there are certain people around that seem to have no fear of the virus whatsoever, which points to the reality that these have efficient medicines that do work, but seemingly like to use these for themselves alone. Otherwise, the whole of the continuation of the economy and running businesses to the last extent of survival and to total massacre, if you want, would of course not be possible and make no sense indeed. But without the introduction of correct medicines concerning the prolonged functioning in the industry and economy, a drastic reduction and then a complete disintegration of the same will inevitably take place, as a result of which it would have to be communicated and discussed with the public for the sake of prevention, or at least an explanation of what happens and can happen in case of an emergency, and which detailed measures of which specific expectations can be foreseen and anticipated. Besides, who would benefit from seeing the figures continue to be underestimated, where everything just seems to continue to run its course, to then ultimately only with the toughest maneuvers and distress and coercive measures, and then even with more drastic measures whereby issues are geared towards life and limbs, which we absolutely want to avoid at all times and counteract, such here in Europe and in our Western world, seeing all being forced only to then unfairly and without proper education and preventive advice and proposed measures be crammed in a forced quarantine situation, which is pure insanity. Because in there is moreover no effective medicine or effective means to contain the coronavirus, which is to be especially communicated to the public, as they are driven to intense fear through this, and in which there is also an absolute lack of protection, which also applies to the paramedical workers, doctors and nurses, etc. And this also applies outside medical facilities. And since this is so, it only pushes the figures of infection further and higher into the sky, because the truth is that there are no absolute containment measures for the virus set in place, and which of course makes the whole idea of quarantine obviously pointless and as well totally questionable. The only solution to the rapid and stoppable contagion and infection is that a correct solution must be offered and publicly introduced, which every inhabitant of the earth is entitled to, and this must also be made available, namely personal and working and sufficiently effective medications. And once more stated here, this will be explained and presented in the next official letter. Furthermore, 6. Once again, an absolute containment and perfect safety is absolutely underestimated and requires much more profound drastic measures and resources, namely where, for example, the duration of a quarantine should be much longer than 2 weeks, according to our exact data that we've received regarding the incubation, because from the point of the initial infection, the incubation period can last longer than 2 weeks, namely up to 4 weeks or more, and even possibly 3 months. Conclusion: never will so many and so quickly infected people accumulated exponentially over a period of 3 months be safely settled and treated. What does this mean? In the incubation period, which can happen for a period of 3 months, in which the whole thing happens asymptomatic, but nevertheless is infectious. This means that people can infect each other without being able to see or perceive anything of it. So if this imperceptible infection continues over a time span of 3 months, this absolutely means that not only the whole community but entire areas could be infected in more or less the same time. This is what is standing here. So I will repeat: never will so many and so quickly infected people accumulated exponentially over a period of 3 months be safely settled and treated in such quarantine misery, that is, not in any existing facility or medical facility, and certainly not in a quarantine center, and certainly not in a place where the protective resources are insufficient, having no adequate precautionary measures, and then without effective medicine. Then it is absolutely even better that each and every one is left alone, in peace, with peace of mind, and further try to isolate themselves as much as possible and stay in their homes as long as possible. Also, the virus cannot be sufficiently repelled with a mouth mask of any kind, because the corona pathogen is too small and just goes right away through the mask as if one isn't wearing one at all. Only with a fully encapsulated, hermetically sealed suit that works with a separate oxygen unit can we speak of sufficient and effective protection. On the other hand, mouth masks are nevertheless still recommendable for all and everyone in public situations, and may at least help a little, and also may help to protect others. So quarantine, according to the existing but insufficient EU directives, is much more dangerous than just staying at home, and also the caregivers need to remain adequately protected, which is not the case and will not be the case, causing them in turn to become infected and yes, just continue to spread the flammable fire. Thus, it should be stressed that a quarantine should be sufficiently equipped, namely with the use of sluices, lock, floodgates, that is, suction systems, ventilation system, low pressure chambers and principles, etc., just like in a biological lab, with a highest biosafety code. Which generally is certainly not the case in the quarantine facilities, where the guidelines of the European Union and further throughout the world are insufficient. But in these also the effective medicines need to be made available. Nowadays quarantine centers should stop the spread, but thus in fact the opposite, where it can be said that the quarantine centers are true incubators. This can really be observed by the cruise ship quarantines, which is also confirmed by the higher scientific data, which means of course that the specifications and the higher scientific data points to this outcome. This means that this highly contagious virus accumulates and thus strengthens when people are put together in a confined place. 7. Given the extremely high infectious nature and the asymptomatic character and mildness of this pathogen during the incubation period, plus the inadequate quarantine facilities, etc., it can be concluded that no individuals are to be sent to their home countries where outbreaks take place, but also that people are not allowed to be transported away from places of outbreak whatsoever. And this should be maintained until the virus has been fully and entirely eradicated in the affected areas and countries, or until the virus has died out on its own. In the same way, all infected areas should be hermetically sealed and any entry or exit into non-accessible regions or countries should be prohibited. And last but not least, it should be regulated and in a similar manner pronounced that whosoever entered a non-accessible zone or area should no longer be allowed to get out until the virus is no longer active. And infections, contagion and disease do not no longer occur. 8. In view of the fact that the seriousness of the infection to a large extent depends on the strength of the person's immune system, where it is to be mentioned here that some human races may be less or more resistant to the coronavirus, which to date has remained unknown to the scientists. That is to say, there is the fact that Chinese and Asiatic people are highly susceptible to the virus and will therefore subsequently produce quicker and clearer symptoms. Whereas we Westerners, on the other hand, have a stronger immune system to the virus, and so we are a bit more resistant to it. But we will thus also be less likely showing symptoms. Which does not alter the fact that we too are contagious or very contagious, so we will have we will not show symptoms as early as the Asiatic and Chinese people, that is saying here. Which is dangerous in view of the fact that due to a much later occurrence of visible symptoms, everything together can lead to a total, colossal and sudden mass collective outburst. And according to probability calculation, in my opinion, this is what we all possibly or quite probably have in front of us. In other words, this could mean that our European and Western world will remain without symptoms for a much longer time, or that they will only remain mild, which could meanwhile infect everyone at the same time in an unseen way, which could lead to a massive collective and integral outburst, causing an unprecedented mass mortality of the population such as the world has never experienced before. With the result that the ship will then be hopelessly out of control and would no longer be able to be steered. Notwithstandingly, also in our Western world the coronavirus is certainly dangerous, but with regards to people who are already ill or have a weak immune system to deal with, this can of course more quickly lead to death. Finally, the integral containment at the last is probably no longer feasible, not even with all available means. What the Berlin-based virologist Christian Drosten on Sunday, February 23rd reported to the German press agency, which is also of absolute correctness according to our data, so it can be expected that the virus will spread worldwide and much further than is presently the case. In order to be able to prevent the spread of the virus, the WHO should have taken immediate measures and right away declared a pandemic risk. This immediately after the first cases of the disease were made public and then made the precautionary measures publicly known, and in so doing taking the appropriate steps, which would have entailed the isolation or the total shielding off of the infected areas, that is to say in the manner that no one is allowed in or out of the country until the disease has been eliminated or became no longer active by itself. Regrettably, the WHO has, in a non-assertive manner, not wanting to kick anyone on their toes, nor to make itself unpopular, but has thus proved to be acting completely irresponsible because it has not considered and taken the right and sufficient measures as this in any sense. Experts in the field have shown that a pandemic starts when 100 people have died in a country and at least 3 people have been infected over the border. Until here. An expectancy to receive a comprehensive resonance and return as soon as possible. Much thanks in advance and with my best regards. 0470 13 67 28 is my phone number in Belgium, Benjamin van Heluwe. Thank you for your attention and may we all help spreading this information.